Okay, hello everyone, and really delighted to be able to talk to you this night here in Adelaide. I'm talking to you from Adelaide, from the University of South Australia. The work that I'm going to present today has been led by Andrea Duff, and also in collaboration with Andrew Zametnik and Lisa Smith, all four of us from the University of South Australia. Let me first tell you a little bit what is our plan to cover through this talk. The first one is, the talk is about using learning analytics in a new area, which is academic integrity. And the first thing we wanted to do is describe a little bit to you the context in which we deploy these ideas, the aim we had, and also the type of objectives that we had in mind. Then we'll tell you a little bit about the method that we follow to study this context. We'll go very quickly through the results and then gather up some conclusions. So the first thing, I think this is very important because as far as I can tell, we are opening a new context for learning analytics. Pretty much all of you are probably familiar with the issue of academic integrity, right? There are lots of news articles, and some countries are taking this problem more serious than others, but I think everybody's reaching the consensus that academic integrity is now becoming a serious problem in higher education. It's reaching a point that there's quite a lot of people that are doing substantial studies, right? This one that you see at the bottom of this slide was carried out in 3 large Australian universities. You see the number of subjects is fairly large, north of 14,000. And it was a survey that was conducted, and more than 5% of the students acknowledge that they engage with the purchase or procurement of assignments. So we're talking about a very specific breach of academic integrity, but it gives you an idea of the scale or the size of this type of situation. Needless to say, there is money involved in here, or there is a connection with an industry, and probably some of you, if not all, are familiar with the type of tools that are now being sold to universities to try to tackle this problem of academic integrity. Again, it's not just one problem that we need to address. It's a much more complex one, but needless to say, there has been an opportunity and some businesses have moved into that space. And the figures that we're looking at are actually fairly substantial. Now, the problem that we had when we studied this, and we had a team of experts here at the university studying this problem, is that there are 2 different issues that need to be differentiated. One of them is detection, right? Detection of these breaches of academic integrity. And there is quite a lot of actions and quite a lot of administrative process once a detection, once a case of academic integrity breach is detected. And I don't know what is the situation in the audience's institutions, but in our case, for example, there is quite a lot of policy documents and operational guides on how to deal with that detection. When we first look at this problem, we realized that all that emphasis on how to process the cases was much more intense with the amount of resources to prevent these cases. So we started to unpack a little bit, okay, and is there a way for us to prevent reaching that point? Now, some of these articles already give you very good detailed descriptions of what is the motivation or what prompts the students to do that. And 4 very important categories is first, the satisfaction with the course, sometimes the opportunities they have to reach out for this type of situation, sometimes it's a study difficulty, and in some cases it's a language barrier. So what we realized very early is that there seems to be quite a lot of studies trying to understand how students make that decision and how do they reach the point where they say, yep, I'm going to reach out and use these services, or more precisely, I'm going to make the decision to perhaps engage in certain practice that is not compliant with academic integrity. So the first question we ask ourselves is there a possibility for us to support students in their decision-making process? Now, see that so far we haven't talked about data at all. We are talking about from the student point of view, right? We identify a situation where students are making decisions. Can we support students in that decision-making process? So we started unpacking the context and say, rather than deploying or designing very sophisticated administrative processes to deal with academic integrity, can we perhaps prevent it? And we started unpacking it backwards and saying, maybe suggest some ideas to the students, maybe detect them in advance, maybe even propose some actions. Then we kept reading the literature and we came across this very important observation. This is a study that was done long time ago, but it's actually, you can confirm that with your academic experts, academic integrity experts in your institution. Most students who plagiarize are not deliberate cheaters. In other words, it is a bit unfair. It's actually very unfair to start saying, oh, students, yeah, some of them, they actually cheat. And there is quite a lot of wide variety of situations, and some of them are not deliberate. So the number of cases actually that are deliberate attempts are very small. So that made us realize that there was an audience for this idea. And that audience are those students that find themselves in an academic integrity breach process without being aware that they were getting into it, without deliberately trying to cheat. So
Hi, Abelardo. Sorry for the interruption. Just wanted to check if this is the slide you are wanting to populate, because we are only seeing one slide and there are some questions in the chat about the slides
You're
not
right.
moving.
The slides are not advancing for some reason.
Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can stop sharing. Okay, yeah, I know what happened. There was a button here that said stop sharing, and now it says resume sharing. All right, let me stop and share again. Let's see if that works.
Okay.
Bear with me for a second. Maybe I need to get out of the presentation. Let me start sharing again. Yep. Let me see now if this works. All right.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Go ahead, please.
No, it doesn't, because if I now go to the next slide, it gets stuck. Okay.
In your previous screen, I was able to see all the slides though. Do you want to just step through them?
Without the presentation. That's maybe the alternative. What we can do right now is go here, reduce this thing, reduce this, and basically, yeah, broadcast that, which is not the, it's not the presentation, but it doesn't matter, because as soon as I go into sharing mode, it pauses the presentation. So it doesn't matter. We can continue like that. So sorry about that. Maybe I should go back to these slides and do them very quickly. Anyway, I hope we are following the discussion. I was about to say this article that we found that showed to us how most of the students that are involved in an academic integrity case are not deliberate cheaters. And this was important. I'm glad you flagged this anomaly with the presentation, because it was a pivotal moment for our study. Once we realized that this percentage of studies was very large, and we confirmed that with conversations with our academic integrity officers, then we decided to change the problem and say, yep, definitely, can we support students in the process of becoming acquainted with the writing process, for example. And I know that academic integrity is much wider and goes beyond writing documents, but we decided to focus on that. And then all of a sudden, everything fell into place. We can propose in the learning design some activities. We can detect level of engagements. We can probably suggest some actions, and therefore end up preventing cases. And this is a first study, a preliminary study in this direction. Now, all my animations won't work, but anyway, I don't have too many of them. The other thing that I wanted to mention before getting a little bit more into the description of the project is that we have a very strong pedagogical angle here. We decided to explore what is the best way to adequately support students to prevent these academic integrity issues. And this is reflected in that word at the bottom of the slide that says propose. So we are very strong believers that learning analytics in itself is not a solution. It is a solution where it's properly contextualized in a learning design. And this was a textbook case. The learning design was asking for some scaffolding to suggest the students to become aware of potential problems with academic integrity. And in fact, we ended up not even framing those as problems, but just of certain conventions or certain processes to be aware of. The additional challenge we had in here is that we couldn't propose a self-contained academic integrity course. We needed to embed this resource in an existing course. And this is the reason why the title of this paper includes the reference to the first year engineering, because the challenge was to intervene, to propose a sound pedagogical framework to detect academic integrity issues and promote a much more thorough approach, and therefore preventing academic integrity cases. So again, I want to emphasize that pedagogical angle was very important. But of course, we want to do this at scale. This was a course that had more than 160 students, and therefore the proposing, the detecting, and the suggesting couldn't be done at scale unless we had some sophisticated way, or some sophisticated, not sophisticated, but some data relevant way of providing these insights. And this is where learning analytics becomes handy. Okay, so hopefully we'll recover from this initial anomaly of sharing the screen, and we can now go and explain a little bit more about the method. So let me first give you a bit of the context of the course. So this is a first-year engineering course. It contains written assignments, and therefore it was very suitable to explore this angle of academic integrity. It has, the design approach is fairly blended, so we have face-to-face sessions where students interact with lectures and tutors, but we also have quite a substantial set of resources in an LMS. The course lasts for 13 weeks, and we had an enrollment of 163 students, 23% of them international students. Just a little bit more of the context about the assessment instruments. We have an individual report, written report, which is where we pay attention about how these support for preventing academic integrity issues were deployed. But the course also had some additional portfolio tasks and some group assessment that accounted for 50%, as you can see. This is just a very quick screen capture of how the course looks like from the point of view of the students. This is a conventional course. You enter the LMS, you see the weeks there, and 13 weeks, and some additional resources. Now, the design that we created had 5 standalone modules designed for the support of academic integrity. The reason why I say standalone is because these modules were actually activities that were embedded in the middle of the rest of the activities of the course. And this was important because when you approach academics, and they usually tell you that they are struggling with these issues in their courses, but they are not willing to have an entire section or an entire module on academic integrity. So we wanted to provide them with something that was suitable for embedding. Now, the 5 topics that our experts in academic integrity chose were searching for relevant information, evaluating the quality of retrieved information, integrating information from sources, referencing, and acting ethically. Now, as you can see, these 5 topics, in theory, from the point of view of the pure approach to academic integrity, it should be only about acting ethically. But again, our experts in this issue told us that everything is connected. Sometimes the students are not referring properly. Sometimes they don't know how to integrate information from sources, or worse even, they do not perceive the boundaries that bring them from regular integration of information to a breach of academic integrity. And that's why these 5 topics were selected. Now, the structure of each of the modules, just to convey to you very quickly, basically has a video in which there is a role-playing scene where students are working on a written assignment, and they face certain challenges, and they address those challenges contacting people, looking for resources. So that's basically the structure that all 5 videos follow. Additional reading resources, and then a quiz to make sure that the engagement is properly promoted with the video. Now, this is the screen capture of week 4 of that course. As you can see, there's quite a few things that are totally specific to the course, even the title, Project Challenge and Developing Your Research Skills, and bullet number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th bullet is the one that says complete the integrate and reference of SEIRA in engineering links providing the images below. So this is our way of squeezing or integrating or embedding these resources in the course. Now, the 3 research questions we wanted to explore, very preliminary study, but very interesting results are, first one is if there is a relationship between how students engage with these resources and the subsequent performance in the written assignment. The second one is if we can characterize the type of engagement, even though there are 2 types there, 2 T's, it's only one. And if there is any difference between the different type of engagement patterns, and does that influence the academic performance? Those are the 3 research questions we wanted to explore. So basically, in a nutshell, what we're after is, yep, we went and thought that these modules were the right approach to support the students to prevent academic integrity. How far can we push our insight? How far can we gather data that help us understand what is happening. The data sources we use, we collected statistics about the engagement with the 5 resources. We also obtained the performance score in the written assignment, and we also had a categorical variable that basically told us if the submission was identified as a plagiarism case. And I'll mention this variability toward the end of our results. Throughout the study, we also tried to explore if the data would give us any insight when considering what we call the intensity of engagement, which is basically a simple measure of how deep students engage with each of the 5 modules, and the comprehensiveness, meaning if students engage with all 5 modules or only a subset. Okay, let's move very quickly over to the results. And the first one, the relation with performance. I forgot to mention that basically, well, but you probably already figured this out. The students were given the resources. They were part of the conventional activities, and we let the students to choose if they wanted to engage or not. So the first element we studied was what was the percentage of engagement. And as you can see, 78 of the 163 students, 47.8%, did engage with any of the SEIRA modules, whereas 85% of the students in the course did not engage. So it's almost like a 50-50 split. This is by no means a controlled study. We just let the students choose. So you can imagine that those students that are more likely to engage with all the resources are definitely in the first category, whereas the students that tend to ignore some of the resources are in the second one. The first quick test that we did is if there was any difference between these 2 populations in terms of the score of the first assignment. And again, this is not a randomized controlled trial. It's 2 populations that we have in there. And not surprisingly, we did get the 2 populations with separate medians in the written assignment. The first one had 19.7, second one 16.5, and they were found a statistically significant difference. An additional test we run was to see, out of that separation of 2 populations, what is the probability that students that are not engaging with their resources will perform better than those that are engaging with their resources, and that probability turned out to be 32%, which is lower than a random probability of 50%. So basically, these results establish a relationship between these 2. It's not a causality, of course, because we haven't gone that far, but we can say that the population in the first one that is engaging with the resources seems to be more likely to get a higher score. The second thing we did was to try to cluster these students and see if we can detect differences in the way they behave. Now, this diagram you have in front of you has quite a lot of information. Let's forget for a second about the arrows, and let's look just at the shapes that we see in there. So after running the clustering algorithm, and the details on how we run these algorithms are all in the paper, we found 4 clusters. Cluster number 1 has 60% of the students that engage with the resources, and they basically do a very superficial engagement, just a very quick access or a single access to one element. Cluster number 2, on the other hand, was a bit more engaged, and it had a very selective type of engagement. Cluster number 3 was the one that was accessing all the resources in a very deep fashion. And cluster number 4 had very specific access to only a subset of the elements. I'll give a bit more information in a second. The arrows that we have here is that we selected those factors that explain the highest amount of variability. And the results, what they show us is that integrate and reference seem to be explaining a similar amount of variability and in the same direction, whereas evaluate and search seem to have a completely different approach or a completely different way of explaining the variation. And act ethically appears on its own category. We also ran some additional tests on see how likely are the clusters be able to be differentiated. And one of the things that you can see there is that, let me go quickly to this slide. One of the things the result were showing us is that, for example, clusters 3 and 4, which is the top right and the top left, were very easy to differentiate. This previous slide here puts a little bit of more explanation on this cluster. Cluster 1, very superficial engagement. Cluster 2 seemed to be focused mostly on the act ethically, and the rest of the interaction was very low. Cluster 3 were those students that were very frequently engaging with all the resources, and cluster 4 were very selective. Only a subset of the resources were checked. Now, the other result that we wanted to check is, let's see if we can characterize the students just by the intensity of their engagement, but also by their comprehension of the engagement. In other words, if they were checking all resources or not. In this screen that you're looking at right now, on the left, you see the clusters and how they overlap in these 2 dimensions with comprehension and intensity. And on the right, you have the box plots of score distributions in the assessment when considering these clusters. Now, unfortunately, and this is part of the study, and we thought it would be also worth including here, when we consider both intensity and comprehension, the distribution of the scores in that assessment was not statistically significantly different, and therefore it doesn't give much more of an insight. I think most of the insight comes from these clusters that we consider or calculated in the first round. Okay, the additional result that we found, and this was something that we were planning to do regardless of this approach based on learning analytics, was basically see what happened with those cases that were detected as breach of academic integrity. In this case, this edition of the course detected 5 submissions that were detected with a substantial amount of plagiarism. We were focusing on plagiarism, and all 5 cases were students that did not engage at all with the SEIRA resources. In other words, they were students in the NE category. Now again, this is not a casual relationship, right? It's not necessarily meaning that those students that don't engage are more likely to breach, but it gave us a sense of encouragement for us to pursue this type of resources a bit more comprehensively, because these cases there were students that were not exposed at all to these type of resources. So in conclusion, the main 4 elements that we derive from this study is first that there is quite a lot of space when we talk about academic integrity, and we switch gears and move from punishing or chasing those that are found to be in breach of academic integrity and switch it more to prevention. Learning analytics and learning design provide a very, very powerful context, because large courses, especially in the first year, they need to deal with a very large number of students, and all of them should be aware of how to approach when they write a document, and some of them, they don't seem to have a clear distinction of the type of techniques and practices that would keep them within the expected boundaries when it comes to written assignments. Clearly here, analytics can help to understand this decision-making process. We can detect the students that are not aware of these conventions, or are not aware of these techniques, or they decide not to engage with these resources, and perhaps start unpacking a little bit those roles or those different clusters like we saw, for example. And finally, the study, I think it shows a very preliminary set of results that are very encouraging, and it justifies the deployment of these actions. It validates, probably, maybe not comprehensively, but it gives a very first glimpse on how to embed these resources in courses so that it's a technique that could be potentially be deployed in several courses. And I'm going to leave it here. Thank you, everyone. Apologies again for not switching the slides, or for that glitch that I don't know why it happened. It never happened before in the tests, but hopefully you still could gather the main crux of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.